Great. So Bob Harman, Harman, CEO of Personalized Stem Cells Inc.
So explain to me a little bit about your company and why and how you've gone from what you did before to your involvement now in COVID research.
Great. So Mario, I'm actually a veterinarian by background, and we've been doing work for biotech companies here in San Diego literally since the late 80s. And in 2000, we got involved with bringing stem cell therapy into the veterinary world. So we actually manufacture and provide therapies for a lot of diseases, including lung diseases, in animals. In 2018, we decided to spin out a human stem cell company, now called Personalized Stem Cells Inc., to take all of this 20,000 patients worth of veterinary data and submit it to the FDA and move into human stem cell therapy. In 2018, we started in orthopedics. So Dr. Rogers, who you get the chance to chat with, is involved in orthopedics and using these kind of cells, and he's the lead for our FDA-approved clinical trial for orthopedics. Because I'm a veterinarian and because we've treated this many animals, you might guess we've also treated animals with lung diseases, including, I believe if I'm correct, Mario, you were one of the people who covered our big fires here in San Diego. And during those fires, I actually had personally horses caught in the fires with smoke inhalation damage. And because we were in the cell therapy business, I treated them with their own stem cells, so truly the stem cell therapy. And they had dramatic recovery and no long-term problems. So when COVID came along with flu even prior to that, we started looking at the rationale for would these cells work in a lung disease, in particular a pneumonia kind of a problem. And so again, we took all of our veterinary data and through the FDA applied to see if we could now go in directly into clinical trials using these stem cells. The stem cells we use are stem cells from fat tissue, and Dr. Rogers will talk about sort of why we decided to do that. But we have gone at the request of the White House, directly the coronavirus task force, and applied for rapid review at the FDA so we can begin treating patients here in San Diego nearly immediately.
That's pretty fascinating. You've had, your company's had conversations with the White House to move this forward?
Yes, in fact, one of our board members is actually quite good acquaintance with the vice president and suggested that we go to the task force and say, here, we have capacity. We have GMP, which is an FDA term for manufacturing capacity here in San Diego. If we actually ramped up and had support, we could make as many doses to treat as many as 10,000 patients a month. So it's a huge opportunity. So we just volunteered and stepped up. We talked to Dr. Jeff Howard, who is one of the liaisons in the Vice President's task force, trying to put these various resources together. And he said, please, Bob, apply directly to the FDA. They now have an accelerated program to try to bring these kinds of therapies directly to patients in need in hospitals.
I've heard of some companies getting a response with as soon as 10 days. How are you along in that process?
But funny, we didn't talk about that. You are exactly correct. Exactly 10 days, actually prior to that, we got notice from FDA that they were reviewing our document and they were going to give us accelerated. Yesterday, on Sunday, we got a full written response back from the FDA with a request for some specific information that they need to make their final decision, but they're working really fast. I am so impressed with their timing with as many applications for all kinds of drugs, but we believe that the cell therapy approach is hugely beneficial to the patients that are in the ICUs right now. And again, because we have cells, yesterday, if you were here videoing today, yesterday, we started our final harvest of our first set of doses, which were enough to treat 100 patients. And this morning, we're actually bottling those cells, putting them in a nice little bottle that can be frozen. And then all of the last little quality testing, those could be in patients' treatment literally by the end of this week.
It's nice to hear the White House is working through the weekend, and it sounds like your staff as well is working to crank this out.
Yeah, so we actually manufacture cells for even some local biotech companies for other purposes, for cancer therapy, several different companies here. So we actually make these FDA quality cells for those studies. So when COVID hit, we had an internal discussion and talked with our board and decided we truly were one of those essential companies. And so we've been full-time. In fact, we've been hiring people the past few weeks, technicians to help us scale up. And so we're doing our little part to try to help the economy, but it's because we're doing really important work and trying to scale up where we can provide cells for ongoing studies as well as these new studies for COVID patients. And we're working directly with several local hospitals, including Grossmont Sharp. One of our investigators is actually on staff there and has brought their pulmonary group, their lung group, together with us for multiple meetings. So they're teed up, ready to go as soon as we can get FDA approval.
Aside from FDA approval, what are your hopes for the coming days here?
So our hopes are that we're able to get the White House and some of their groups. So you're probably familiar with BARDA. It's the defense group that has defense countermeasures, and they have been actually working with several vaccine companies. And we hope to get federal government to step in and say, hey, not just this first trial we're doing, and we're really only going to do 20 patients here locally. That's the first study you have to do. We hope we can ramp so we can provide these cells nationally and maybe even internationally to places where they really need this kind of therapy in what's called expanded access or compassionate use. Because this isn't, as you know, this is not going away real soon. And we want to keep our momentum up. We've taken our own resources and gotten to this point, but we hope we get some government resources as well to help us with more manufacturing and scaling up to larger scale.
Now, how would you qualify this, as a cure or a vaccine or as a treatment? Or should I speak to the doctor about that part?
Yeah, so you'll speak to the real doctor. I'm a veterinarian by background.
I'm sorry, yes.
And I've been in this development a long time, but Dr. Rogers is an MD and has actually done a huge deep dive the last 45 days looking at all the literature. And we've just submitted for publication a 30-page manuscript with 250 references on exactly this. But these stem cells that we use, Mario, are your own, that basically it's your toolbox for repairing yourself. Every day when you get a cut, you get the flu, these cells are in your body and help you fight this. We're just putting a larger amount directly in to try to fight the direct problems in the lung. And I'll let Dr. Rogers talk to that because this is his specialty. But it truly reduces the direct effects in the lung right now. So this is not a preventive, this is treating a patient that has this lung disease going on right now in an ICU or in a hospital that needs this kind of therapy to reduce this massive inflammation that's happening in the lungs.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And if I could, Dr. Rogers, if I can, if you could say just a 1, 2, it'll bring you up on the screen.
Yes.
I'm hoping you can get into some more details here. You know, we've heard a lot of talk about antibodies, possible vaccines in that area. Can you give us a more definitive explanation about, you know, what your stem cell research will help against fighting COVID-19?
Yeah, so these are very interesting times. There are more than 900 clinical trials going on around the world. About a dozen of those are dedicated to cell-based therapy. Unlike a drug, which typically has a single mechanism of action, these cells are actually smart living things that respond to their environment. So cell therapy is very well suited for this disease. I noticed this morning that there are almost 700 patients in the hospital. More than 200 of them are in severe or critical condition in the intensive care. The reason why this disease is having such a severe impact is because the lung is being affected by not only the viral infection, but also the immune response to that viral infection. And so cells have been studied in preclinical animal trials, as well as in some human clinical trials, looking at this lung injury scenario where you have an overactive immune system that has attacked the lung. You add to that possible trauma from the ventilation with the high pressure to an already injured lung, you have a very serious scenario. So cells, as Dr. Harmon mentioned, are our body's first aid kit. They are designed to heal us when we're injured or battling disease. They have many mechanisms. Unlike a drug, they have thousands of mechanisms in which they function. And so when you put a stem cell into a body that has a severe lung infection, that cell knows what to do. It knows how to decrease the inflammation. It knows how to repair some of the damage to the lung and to the blood vessels. It also knows how to balance the immune system so that the immune system does not overreact to that infection and cause collateral damage to the lung tissue. And so this has been well studied. We're very optimistic that these cells will be helpful. Many of the other drug studies, as you mentioned, vaccines ultimately will help us prevent patients from becoming infected. Some of the drugs will be designed to minimize the effect of the virus on the body, but the stem cells can actually act on a host of different mechanisms, from limiting the spread of the virus within the body, limiting opportunistic bacterial infections from occurring, as well as all these other mechanisms I talked about, how to help the lungs recover more quickly.
And specifically, what is the treatment?
So we use a cell that is derived from adipose tissue. From 1 or 2 tablespoons of fat, we can produce approximately 10,000 doses. Each patient will receive several million stem cells injected intravenously. This will be performed over a period of days with repeated dosing. Preclinical or other studies that have looked at this in other parts of the world. And by the way, we've been very fortunate. There's been a huge support network of physicians and scientists who are collaborating with each other, sharing their experiences and sharing their data. We get some really great information from China with their early experience using stem cell therapy for treating COVID patients. But it appears that the intravenous dose repeated over 2 or 3 times does appear to have a very significant effect on reducing mortality and improving patient recovery.
That's incredible. So they're using stem cell treatment in China.
They are. There are many different kinds of stem cells. The stem cells are throughout our bodies. They live on very small blood vessels, and you can obtain stem cells from throughout the body, but the most commonly studied are from bone marrow, from umbilical cord, and from fat tissue, which is what we study.
Once you're able to move forward, what are your hopes that you would see as progressing towards working with humans and testing this?
So specifically with COVID, obviously we're very early on in understanding this disease and studying the impact of cell-based therapies for this disease. Initially, we're going to collect safety data. We hope to have very meaningful data here within a matter of weeks to understand some preliminary efficacy. Eventually, we're going to need prospective placebo-controlled clinical trials to fully understand where these cells are providing their biggest benefit and who benefits the most from them. And then these cells, of course, have other uses. So as you heard, we were using them to study our patients with knee osteoarthritis. And we were in the middle of that study when we got called to pivot to COVID.
And at what point in the treatment would you use stem cells on a patient? Would this be the last resort before putting somebody on a ventilator or trying to prevent them from going onto a ventilator?
There's evidence that the cells are helpful not only for those patients who are the most critically severe, who are on a ventilator, but also there is a role in treating the patient earlier when they are first showing signs of respiratory distress, when they are showing signs of what we call cytokine storm, where the immune system is overreacting, producing all these inflammatory molecules. We think that perhaps the cells may have a bigger impact when we treat earlier, just as in many medical treatments, preventive or catching disease states early can be more effective.
And it's exciting. You're working with the White House, you're working with China, and you've got a lot going here. How important is this stem cell treatment?
Oh, we see it as the most viable treatment for a wide host of patients, from the mild, the moderate, and to the most critically severe patients. Eventually, good clinical studies will tell us what the truth is. That's why these studies have to be done.
And will you be working directly with Grossmont in San Diego area, and you're a San Diego-based company?
That's right. Yeah, Sharp Grossmont Hospital was the first to respond, and there are others that we are having discussions with, but we are prepared to treat patients. They already have patients now in the ICU and in the hospital who are being treated for COVID.
Great. And just for our viewers, can you once again give me a quick summary of this stem cell treatment?
So first of all, we manufacture these cells in a GMP facility here in Poway. Those cells are tested for sterility. Those cells are tested for what's actually in the dose. So how many cells are there? What is the quality and character of those cells? Those cells will be administered intravenously through an infusion, just like you would receive a blood transfusion. That will be transfused over a period of 30 to 40 minutes. Patients will be monitored for their response. And then that dose will be repeated a few days after that first dose, and then again, one additional time. And we'll be monitoring the patient's status throughout. So we want to see, does their oxygenation improve? Do their clinical symptoms improve? Do their vital signs improve? Are they recovering from this disease?
Wow, this is very exciting news, and we appreciate your hard work. Any other thoughts that you'd like to, battling this virus, and people have described it as a moving target. I think, it's one of those unprecedented situations where we need all hands on deck trying to fight this. And any thoughts on, just how dangerous this virus is?
Well, we will learn what the true infectious rate is. We will learn what the true mortality rate is associated with this disease. There's a lot of data that's being collected, and it probably will vary by region. But clearly, this disease has resulted in significant mortalities, having a huge socioeconomic burden on our society, not just ours, but around the world. And it's a medical problem that requires a medical solution. And so doing the appropriately performed clinical studies to show what is safe and what is effective and what is most effective for treating diseases is critical, which is why we're doing the work. And I'll just comment, it's a real honor. We've been very fortunate. We have an amazing team of scientists and physicians around the world who are working with us. Everybody has stepped up to the challenge, and I'm confident that we will solve this problem.
Well, thank you so much, both, for taking the time to explain that to us today. And we'll see, we're going to get the word out as well. Thank you very much.
Appreciate that.